Edge Radio 99.3. This is now the Media Mothership. Here, Friday the 16th of December at 5:05 p.m. Media Mothership, we're broadcasting out of Edge Radio Studios here in Nipaluna, Tasmania, Hobart. And we're exploring everything in and around the world of media, including how media shapes our understanding of the world around us for good and for ill. And of course, as always, we're streaming on edgeradio.org.au, as well as being picked up on your FM system on 99.3 FM. And you can also grab us streaming live on YouTube and Twitch. Just search for Media Mothership. If you want to message or chat to us during the show, you can reach out via the chat on YouTube or Twitch. Or you can SMS us on 0488811707. I'm your host, Dr. Craig, PhD, as always. And the topic today is the penultimate 5 minutes of House on Haunted Hill, through which we're finally going to discuss the idea of Chekhov's gun in particular, because we've had in this penultimate 5-minute sequence 2 Chekhov guns. So we'll explore what the Chekhov gun is, why it's so important, and whether or not the Chekhov guns that we've seen in these last penultimate 5-minute sequences are worth it. Are they satisfying? So that'll be House on Haunted Hill, the 1959 Vincent Price classic. Looking at we're up to minute 65 to minute, 70. So we will have one more 5-minute section next week to explore, which will be the final episode of 2022. Of course, we will return in 2023. We'll take one short week off, week after next. So we'll have one episode next week, providing closure to everyone just before Christmas, just before the end of 2022. And then we'll be back in, the second week of January, I want to say. But anyway, we'll be back. More information next week, looking at that, as well as the new media analysis setup we're going to be doing, which is going to be very exciting, where we're pivoting from film to radio dramas. And in particular with radio dramas, the classics. And I won't tell more. We'll discuss it more next week. I might even put a poll up to see which of the classic mystery, horror, science fiction radio dramas we'll start exploring in 2023. Very exciting there. So all that, and of course we'll be discussing a little bit of the latest news stories which have been coming out in media. There's quite a bit of controversy over the last week since we were last on air that I'm really keen to explore, to check out what the implications are of it. So keep listening to Edge Radio 99.3 here on the Media Mothership. All right, we're back. Welcome to the Media Mothership here on Edge Radio 99.3 FM with your host, Dr. Craig. And let's jump straight into the penultimate exploration of House on Haunted Hill, the 1959 classic. We've done quite a journey on this. Last week we explored the question of, is Nora, the character of Nora, a final girl, a proto-final girl? That is she... as it appeared to be a kind of a survivor character, a la Jamie Lee Curtis from Halloween or Sigourney Weaver from Alien. Is she a character that is going to be the final girl character, female character, who thwarts the evil, defeats the bad guy, kills the monster, a la Final Girl from the 80s? Or not, given this is 1959 and the final girl theory was discussing a kind of emergence of a new portrayal of female characters in genre films. This House on Haunted Hill probably is going to stay the course of conventional, as we explored with Hitchcock's quote last week, the kind of male voyeurism of female suffering, that kind of torture that Hitchcock was talking about, that he will portray beautiful girls undergoing torture, a la Psycho, of course. So will it go that way? Will we just see Nora's torture and for her to be rescued by another character, a la Lance, the male Chad character? Or is this an undiscovered, Bechdel test masterpiece of, feminine empowerment that has been unknown? Let's first set up what this 5 minutes is exploring. So as we discussed, last 5 minutes, we had the big reveal, the big twist that Annabelle, who we thought was dead, is indeed alive. And the twist is, it's a genre twist, so we suddenly changed gears from feeling that this is a horror film with jump scares and the paranormal, and we'd seen evidence of that. The character of Nora, the only one of the 5 or 6 collected characters who had accepted the challenge by Frederick, played by Vincent Price, to spend a night in this haunted house, and if they do, they get $10,000 American $1959, right? So Nora had, amongst the others, except that she's the only one that's witnessed the paranormal, or supposedly paranormal, right? She saw the head in her makeup kit. Then there was the kind of witch-like character that tried to attack her. She's been menaced by all number of horrific, including the kind of gorilla hand that we saw, and in the scene before that, the hanging corpse of Annabelle. But we've all found that that's not the case. So let's listen to the dialogue as it really changes gears here from a horror film into a kind of crime thriller, where now we're hearing the whodunit aspect of it, and a kind of, film noir, femme fatale narrative. So this is now the doctor, who turns out wasn't simply one of the guests who was after the money. Turns out he was the secret lover of Annabelle, cheating on Frederick, the Vincent Price character. He is the guy that's cheating, the adulterer. And here we have them discussing how they think they've gotten away with it. And this, could be a kind of mini Chekhov gun, right? They're setting up this idea that here we have the criminal saying, we've done it, we've gotten away with it, setting up this idea in the audience's mind that, this is full of hubris, and what we're seeing here possibly is the trope of the bad guys revealing their plans just to each other and the audience, not to any other characters. Revealing their plans, knowing that it's about to come undone. But let's listen now to their discussion of their masterminded plan. So this is just Annabelle and the doctor talking about their plan.
About planning, darling. Where's Nora now? What's happening?
On her way to the cellar. So scared she'll shoot the first thing that moves.
And Frederick?
On his way to the cellar, too.
David, are you sure none of them will suspect us?
Of what? An hysterical girl accidentally shoots somebody? Who would suspect that we planned it that way, that we drove her to it?
What about my suicide?
But just a ghost party gag. We'll claim it was a dummy since I'm the only one who touched you.
And the caretakers?
Well, they had no idea what they were really doing.
What about Nora? She's not stupid,
Darling, believe me, everything we planned is working perfectly. Nora is sure Frederick murdered you. She thinks Frederick attacked her in the cellar, not me. And now Nora's almost out of her mind with fear. The heads, the music, you're hanging. I tell you, when Frederick walks in there, she'll shoot him.
It's taking too long. David, you ought to be there.
Right, and there we go. Passionate embrace, the femme fatale, kind of adulterer with their plans. And, it's a good back and forth in terms of, establishing that this is now a crime thriller where, will the bad guys get away with it? Will they not? So what's interesting to me, though, is where this goes next. So as is set up in that scene, the Doctor has and Annabelle have set this up so that they've sent Vincent Price's character, Frederick, down to the basement with a gun to see what that sound was. And the Doctor has also, and Annabelle have also traumatized Nora, they believe, for the final time, right? This is going to push her over the edge, right? They kind of assaulted her with a ghost rope, and she witnessed the hanging again of Annabelle, and the piano played, right? So she flew out screaming with a gun, and she's raced down to the basement. So the idea is that we're going to see these guns go off. And of course, the guns we saw really early on in that fantastic scene, when all the characters are together and they're explaining the rules of what's going to happen, and Frederick, played by Vincent Price, gives everyone the party gift of guns. And that's about at the end of the first act. Everyone gets these guns, and you're thinking, okay, so now we know everyone's armed, and there's a bit of dialogue around, the danger of getting these guns. What if Nora was to see someone in the state she's in? So they're kind of setting up that question. Now we had that, as well as what happens in this scene is Nora does indeed shoot Frederick. So Vincent Price's character does get shot by Nora. Norris runs out screaming, so we have a kind of fulfillment of the gun there, or a clear fulfillment of the gun. The gun's now been shot. Frederick has been killed. Then we have a second Chekov gun moment where the Doctor comes down to check on what's happened, and does find, Frederick's corpse there, and begins dragging him opens up the acid pit, right? So again, earlier on, when they got the tour of the haunted house, they showed the basement and they showed the acid pit, and quite a bit of drama was set up around that, right? They threw the rat in, and you saw the rat bubble and turn into a skeleton, and there was quite a lot of dialogue around the fact that the previous owner had dispatched his wife by pushing her into the acid vat. Right, so we have this idea that the acid vat was this object full of potential death. And in this scene, we see the Doctor drag Frederick's corpse and push it into the acid pit. Wow, does it? It's a really interesting moment, because what happens is we see we see the Doctor dragging Frederick. Then the screen just goes black. Why does it go black? I don't know. Well, clearly it goes black because all we hear, right, the screen suddenly goes black. All we hear is a bit of a muffled scuffle sound, and then the sound of a body splashing into the acid pit and bubbling away to dissolve. Setting up a kind of mystery, right? So heading into this last 5 minutes, who is in the acid pit? We thought Vincent Price's character had been shot and killed, but we don't know now. It seems really heavy-handed. Why does the screen go black? Is there any diegetic reason for that occurrence? Because at that point, the camera is this kind of God's eye view moment, right? It's not a character's point of view that we're seeing in that scene. It's just us seeing, a la God's eye view, a character drag another character into the acid pit to be dispatched, but then they go to black. So it seems like a really cheap way of creating a mystery, right? So we don't hear. I mean, if they'd done a kind of light flickering moment, light went out, there could be a diegetic reason why it suddenly went dark. It would be worth watching that again. So what I want to do now, though, is unpack those two moments, the gunshot being fired by Nora to kill Frederick, we think, and the use of the acid tub, and explore that through Chekhov's gun. Firstly, well, let's go to a short clip explaining Chekhov's gun. So, of course, for those that haven't come across it before, Chekhov's gun is a term coined by the famous Russian author, playwright, Anton Chekhov. And basically he stated, if you say in the first chapter that there is a rifle hanging on the wall, in the second or third chapter, it absolutely must go off. If it's not going to be fired, it shouldn't be hanging there at all. And the idea, of course, is Chekhov was, basically focusing on how to create really lean, efficient storytelling, right, where there's no superfluous information. So the Chekhov gun idea is, if you're going to reveal a gun in chapter 1, make sure it goes off in the second or third chapter, or else get rid of the gun, right? There's no point in having it. So as Chekhov himself went on to say, remove everything that has no relevance to the story. It's wrong to make promises you don't mean to keep, right? So if you see the gun in Act 1 or in Chapter 1 and it doesn't go off, the idea is the audience will be annoyed that there was this implicit promise of the gun having some use, or else why show it? Right. So let's hear firstly from this really interesting interview with scriptwriter Adam Skelter as he talks with the Film Courage YouTube channel about Chekhov's gun and its importance and why it matters so much in terms of creating good storytelling. And then we'll apply some of those ideas to that use of it in House on Haunted Hill.
Can we talk about Chekhov's gun?
So basically, Chekhov's gun is the axiom is if there's a gun on the wall and you mention it, you have to use it. If the gun doesn't go off, then you've set up an expectation that you didn't deliver on. And it's a good principle. And again, it's one of those principles where it's like, generally speaking, you want to obey it. But again, look at No Country for Old Men. Llewellyn Moss is a loaded gun on the wall. And in the end, he fails, and we don't get what we expected, but it meant something to the story. So
that's it. Just interrupting for a second. That's an interesting point about the importance of Chekhov's gun and when you can break it or not break it. No Country for Old Men, interesting example. And a small spoiler if you haven't seen it, but it does set up this idea that we see a sheriff's character at the start and we see criminals, and the assumption being, of course, that a la Chekhov's gun, if we're seeing a sheriff investigating a crime, the end will be that the criminal will get caught. There'll be some resolution there. Those two forces will come together. Of course, what's so surprising about No Country for Old Men is that that doesn't occur, that that the Chekhov's gun phenomenon does not play out, that instead the story goes off in a different concluding way that doesn't abide by Chekhov's gun. But let's listen more to what Adam Skelter has to say about how this, as a general principle, usually does hold up and is important to follow through on.
So it's like every principle. It helps us to understand, like, the general principle is that if you're going to talk about something, no detail in any story should ever be wasted. Especially with screenwriting, you want to be as sparse as possible. You want to be as specific as possible. So when you're writing something, you're not just throwing stuff out there. It all has to be, you should regard every single word as a kind of setup that you now have a debt to resolve.
And again, I think that's a really important idea of resolving in terms of films that haven't been able to execute Chekhov's gun well, or part of the criticism of those films is how they've failed to achieve Chekhov's gun. The first Suicide Squad is often used as an example more recently, where you have the character, if you've seen it, Suicide Squad superhero film, it combines a group of villains to come together to kind of be used to fight other villains or threats. Right, Suicide Squad, DC film. Now, one of the criticisms was towards the character of Captain Boomerang, because we see early on they establish that, you know, he's a hard-nosed criminal, he's a supervillain, but there's a scene where we see him with this unicorn, this pink fluffy unicorn that he's holding, and the question being, you know, why do we see this pink fluffy unicorn? And quite a bit of kind of attention is given to it. We see it like he's getting all his gear, and we suddenly see it, and he kind of secures it away, embarrassed that no one else has seen it. We do see it again, right? So again, in terms of Chekhov's gun, the idea that if we see it once, we should see it again. So we see it again in a gunfight that he has in an alleyway, where during the dynamic action, some of his clothing spills out, including we see a slow-mo and a focus shot on the pink fluffy unicorn. Thinking, okay, well, we're seeing it again, so this must mean something. And we do see it a third time, but again, the idea is, and why it was so frustrating is, that it was not used, the unicorn was not used in any way to resolve the issue. That is, the unicorn didn't play a function that was used in any way for action. We just saw it visually as part of the mise-en-scène. It wasn't used to deflect a shot. It wasn't used to distract a villain. It wasn't used to develop his character further by other characters discussing why he has it. It was simply seen 3 times in the film with no payoff. So again, we see a lot of setup, but we see no payoff. So the idea of Chekhov's gun is not simply to, you see it once, and then the film director has to show it another or third time, right? Rule of threes. It's not the case. Instead, what the frustration is that it's not used to resolve. And there's a great YouTube channel, Folding Ideas, which does a little deep dive into that as the problem, that the Captain Boomerang Chekhov gun failure of that film. Let's go back, hear a little bit more about Adam Skelter's ideas.
But that said, if you are going to break that rule, have a really good reason for it. No Country for Old Men is the perfect reason because it directly contributed to the interpretation of the theme.
So even like if you just want to paint, like in novels, I think, aren't we much more apt to an author is going to paint a world and maybe add little details, but in a screenplay, no, you're saying don't do too much of that world because it's just
I would even say even
time.
with novel writing.
Oh, really?
So that's interesting, yeah. So he sees this as a kind of really hard rule for efficient storytelling, right? Even for novelists. Again, the question there from the Film Courage person was, well, for a novelist, they've got so many more words, and they're doing world building, and they can set it all up, and, they might not deliver on some of it, but it doesn't matter. And again, Adam Skelter saying, no, even for script writing, even for novel writing, because again, the main goal is to make sure that you're kind of abiding by a contract with the audience, that the audience is going to put a lot of energy in to remembering an enormous amount of details in the world you're creating with the idea that there'll be payoff for it, even if, for example, it's not obvious on first viewing or first reading the significance of something. Nevertheless, by the end, that insignificant object has meaning and significance. You could look at Rian Johnson's film Knives Out, and again, I'll show a short clip from Studio Binder talking about the importance of how Knives Out plays off really perfectly with setup and playoff, but with an object that at first viewing you don't realize it's significant. That's the baseball. We see the baseball constantly, as well as the sculpture of all the knives behind the characters. We see that constantly throughout the film, but there's no direct attention given to it to explain what its value is. However, by the end, we know its significance. Right, but we don't feel cheated. We don't feel cheated by it. And this is Adam Skelter's argument that even for novelists, if you're going to set up objects and spend time, create time requirements for your audience to read, engage, and understand them, have payoff, or else the audience will feel cheated. Right? For example, if the author just brings in out of the blue something and resolves it through that method, the audience is right to feel cheated that there was no reason for that. That Deus Ex Machina moment is implausible. It wasn't set up. It was unsatisfying. It's just an example of the character having plot armor that meant they had to survive. It is implausible, and the audience will feel cheated, which is what Adam Skelter's argument was. Another example which many people point to about a recent film that failed the Chekhov gun test was, I remember seeing the Zack Snyder casino zombie film that he did recently, Zombie Army, I think it's called. And one of the things that's really interesting is quite a lot of dialogue is given when they get into Las Vegas to do their kind of heist movie. It's infested with zombies, but the zombies are mostly, the first ones they encounter are mostly all dead because of the sun. But there's dialogue saying, well, if it rains, they'll all reanimate. The rain will kind of rehydrate them and they'll come back. But that never pays off. That dialogue, which is discussed and set up like a Chekhov's gun, that, if you're going to give time and effort to establish some rules for this world, that the zombies are dehydrated and will stop functioning, but will rehydrate. Great. but make something of that. Set up and payoff. Where's the payoff for that? So again, the frustration is there's no payoff. Let's go into now the studio binder discussion of Chekhov's gun, because it introduces, I think, a really interesting formula for figuring out what Chekhov's gun means in terms of the components of it. We won't play the whole thing. I just want to set it up with the 3 principles of Chekhov's gun for you to get a handle on that will then apply to House on Haunted Hill. So this is from Studio Binder, talking about what is Chekhov's gun and how Knives Out perfects the setup and payoff. Set off and payoff. That I'll play right now.
This is What is Chekhov's Gun? Chekhov's gun, attributed to the 19th century Russian playwright Anton Chekhov, is a dramatic principle that claims everything in your story should be relevant and to discard anything unnecessary to the plot.
That's you.
So they have this, I'll just describe it because it's a great clip. It's from Inglourious Bastards, and it's a setup where we see, not Inglourious Bastards, Once Upon a Time in America, Quentin Tarantino's Once Upon a Time in America. We see our main character played by DiCaprio using this flamethrower on set in a film that he'd been filming, which we know that flamethrower's significance later on in the film, that it's, again, this kind of Chekhov's gun moment scene from Once Upon a Time in America.
You operating the flamethrower, isn't it?
You bet your sweet ass it was.
All right, that's too hot.
Chekhov describes this dramatic principle as such. One must never place a rifle on the stage if it isn't going to go off. It's wrong to make promises you don't mean to keep. These promises can also be made with dialogue.
Yeah, so as we talked about there, the scene from Army of the Dead, where a character talks about the fact that zombies can be reanimated if it rains, but doesn't pay off. That dialogue, that Chekhov gun dialogue never occurs. And, again, that's part of that contract that audiences think something's integral to the film. So let's listen to Studio Binder's further definition of Chekhov's gun.
If this is gonna pay off later on.
Anything that is assumed to be integral to the story and expected to show up again.
This means something. This is important.
To use Chekhov's gun effectively, consider these 3 things. Visibility is how obvious you present the quote-unquote gun.
So the first one is visibility, right? So as the Studio Binder quote says, how visibly you present the gun, right? Does the camera pause on it? Do the characters discuss it? Is it given a lot of attention? Examples they use in the Studio Binder clip are the moment from Close Encounters, if anyone remembers that, where the character is crafting with mashed potatoes the huge mountain, right? So we're seeing this Chekhov gun object, right, where the character is lingering, or the camera, is lingering over this mashed potato food mountain, and its particular iconic mountain shape, the kind of cylindrical shape that it has. Setting up this idea of its significance, but through its visibility, that is that the camera spends a lot of time making it visible and important. How obvious you're presenting the gun to the audience. In the case of House on Haunted Hill, it was literal, right? Again, they set up this very visible object of the gun, and for those that saw it, it's quite a famous or infamous scene in House on Haunted Hill because each gun resides in a little tiny coffin which is opened up. And the dialogue is hilarious, where the Vincent Price character Frederick is saying, these are our party treats. So again, this kind of real paradox of a flippant discussion of loaded guns as kind of in jest, with the kind of macabreness of having them in little coffins, and the fact that, yes, one of the characters is being psychologically traumatized to lash out with that gun. But again, it's highly visible, it's highly memorable in the film, raising in the audience's mind, aha, this is a Chekhov gun moment in this film. There's so much attention given to the gun that it might be going off. So let's see what the other two characteristics are, two criteria are of effectively creating a Chekhov's gun moment in a film.
Visibility is how obvious you present the quote-unquote gun. Do you use a close-up with dramatic music? Or do you let it come and go without focusing on it?
So some other examples there could be the fact in Inception, we kind of have a Chekhov gun with the spinning top that the DiCaprio character refers to as a significant object in the mechanism of doing Inception, but it's also functioning as a Chekhov's gun object, or one by the end of the film we look back on and realize that spinning top is a Chekhov gun. That is, it's setting up a particular payoff. It's a setup and payoff object. It's set up, he talks about it, it's given a lot of attention in the film, and then we see it at the end with this idea of payoff, that the camera lingers on it and focuses on it for quite a long time.
What do you want?
See, is how clear the...
So we'll get to the second example now, or the second criteria that Studio Binder set up for Chekhov's gun.
Relevancy is how clear the importance of the gun is to the story.
So that second criteria is relevancy. How do you create a connection between the gun and the story, right? So again, the audience is aware of its significance, that it has a specific diegetic in-world significance, right? So in House on Haunted Hill, we have these kind of two bits of dialogue, so we had those two objects, the acid pit and the guns. So there is significance in the film with the gun. So there's dialogue there around its relevancy, being that it's relevant to see these guns because each character is being given these guns as a sense of reassurance in the dialogue, right? They're getting these guns to feel protected, with the idea implausibly that they're not going to be used. Like, oh no, you won't be used. Even though a character flags, we've got characters here that are already starting to be a bit hysterical. But the relevancy is in the film, they're given to the characters to hold. The relevancy of the acid pit, of course, was again establishing that this is a haunted house space, that this is a space which is haunted, ghostly, and menacing, and the acid pit was an example of that it was a gruesome object, much like in a haunted house tour that involved the death of another character. So again, the idea that it's relevant. Interestingly, again, it was part of a number of objects we saw. So again, its significance does come back. We're reminded of it by the time it's used in the 5 minutes we've seen. That kind of sense of, the acid pit, I'd forgotten about that. I guess it was significant. So that's the relevancy of how it will be used. So equally, Shawshank Redemption, you could point to the setup with the Andy wanting the poster of Rita Hayworth, right? And that kind of set up this idea of the payoff when that poster is discovered later on by the warden. Rosebud as well, right? So Citizen Kane at the start sets up this mystery. We see his death, and the last words he says is Rosebud. So again, the camera gives this relevancy within the film that, wow, the last words of a dying man, what does that mean? And then the film goes into this biopic about Citizen Kane's background, his life leading up to what is Rosebud. So now we'll get to the third criteria, the final example of Chekhov's gun.
And velocity is how fast or slow the gun is fired after it's loaded. Do you pull the trigger immediately?
Then we could wait until dawn and slice each other up.
Or do you keep the audience in suspense?
So that final criteria, or that final aspect of Chekhov's gun, is once you show the audience through visibility and relevance a significant object, it could be the literal gun that we see, and the audiences start thinking of, okay, well, we've seen the gun, gee, is it going to get fired? How quickly do you then fulfill Chekhov's requirement of using that object? Do you do it immediately? So is the velocity immediate? That is, we see the gun and it gets used. So the example they give there is from Kill Bill, and the character between David Carradine talking about, we see the sword. We suddenly see the sword on the side of the sofa, and immediately the character reaches for it. So the idea is that that velocity is quite quick, that we see a Chekhov gun movement, and it quickly gets a payoff and used by the character, or attempted to be used by the character. Or is there a slower use of it? Rather than using it for shock value, where we see the object and we want to see it used, and it's happened immediately, does it happen kind of in the background and there's an aspect of suspense which boils up? And I think that's certainly the case with House on Haunted Hill and the guns. We see it very much early in the first act, and now we're in the third act, 5 minutes before the end of the film, and finally that gun gets fired. Right, so again, the suspense had been up until that point. All the characters are walking around with guns. Who's going to fire it? And part of that is reminded to by the audience, because just previous to the scene of Nora firing the gun, we see the two criminals talking about the setup. That is, that they'd manipulated Nora by assaulting her psychologically to be in such a state that she's going to shoot anyone that's in the shadows as she's in the basement, which is what seems to happen. So again, the velocity there in the case of the acid pit and the gun is slow, is one of suspense, which Hitchcock would approve of, right? He'd say, yeah, show the people the gun, show the people the fact that the guns get fired, and Vincent Price here fires the gun and it destroys the vase, so we know that they're real bullets, should be real bullets. I wonder what the last 5 minutes is going to reveal. And we have that suspense boiling up through that tension. So those are those three aspects of Chekhov's gun, that it has visibility, how obviously this object is presented to us as Chekhov's gun that's going to be used. How relevant is it able to be made in that moment, right? So it's given importance in the film through dialogue or through the film pausing on or doing slow motion with or going into super close focus on, right? So the audience is made aware of its significance. It's given high relevancy. And finally, velocity. How quickly is that gun shot? How quickly do we see the payoff of that moment? Is it done immediately for shock value, or is it allowed to boil over for suspense? So yeah, I think it's interesting example there of Chekhov's gun in House on Haunted Hill. Rather satisfying. We'll see the final 5 minutes next week to see exactly what technique we will have that's being used by William Castle in House on Haunted Hill. So that was House on Haunted Hill, minutes 65 to 70. And next week, the last 5 minutes. All right, welcome back here to Media Mothership on Edge Radio 99.3 FM. A little bit of news now in the last 5-10 minutes of the show. Some interesting news. First one that I loved is from Sora News 24, talking about KFC releasing an Otaku Burger in Spain. For those who don't know, Otaku, Japanese word meaning geek, nerd, hobbyist, and it became quite popular during the 90s on as the Cool Japan boom began. What's interesting about this story is that KFC in Japan is quite notorious, at least to many foreigners that visit Japan over Christmas, because of KFC's effective marketing strategy to monopolize the diet of Christmas as being a fried chicken, KFC fried chicken diet. That in Christmas, you would eat KFC chicken. So the idea being that a lot of advertising that KFC does is associate Christmas with eating KFC. And it could be this blurred idea from a Japanese point of view, linking maybe Thanksgiving turkey the US tradition and this time of year. But nevertheless, KFC kind of monopolized it. Given Christmas isn't an indigenous holiday of Japan, it's introduced foreign custom. Nevertheless, KFC kind of monopolized it, and people have been scratching their heads since. How did KFC position themselves as saying Christmas is for eating chicken? Which it certainly is not the case in any other country. Until now, it seems, as the masterminds at Spain PR advertising food creation in McDonald's Spain created a new object called Otaku Burger, riffing on this idea of KFC being popular in Japan during Christmas, which is what I like, that kind of permutation of the story that, KFC, for its domestic market in Japan, advertises Christmas as KFC holiday. And then in Spain, this kind of meta commentary around, well, yeah, of course it is Christmas, so you would eat the Otaku Burger, the crazy Japanese Christmas KFC burger. It's kind of clever. I mean, it's kind of like this in-joke as well. If you're in on the joke about how, wow, Japan seems to have this whole KFC fetish in Christmas, and you're not in Japan, but then in Spain, in this case, they're selling this Otaku Burger, Japanese Otaku Burger, riffing on this idea of, Japan likes KFC in Christmas. It's kind of, in-joke funniness. And again, this has been picked up and reported across a number of Japanese news sites as the amusement of it. And again, all based on, and if you look at some of the advertising around it, the commentary of this Spanish advertising of the Otaku Burger specifically cites, and again, to quote the Spanish translation, they quote this idea that in Japan, it's customary to eat KFC at Christmas. Forgetting the fact that KFC invented that idea itself. So again, the snake eating its tail, they've just kind of normalized this in their advertising. In Japan, it's customary to eat KFC at Christmas. Judging by the article goes on to say, judging by the campaign materials, it looks like KFC is hoping to encourage customers in Spain to jump on the Japanese custom, again, the manufactured fake custom, the Japanese fake custom of eating KFC at Christmas. And if otaku in Spain want to adopt a Japanese custom, this seems like a pretty easy way to do it. The lineup includes a burger sold separately or as part of a set, chicken pieces, and a bucket of chicken. Wow. So it's this, what is reality, right? Again, through advertising, through media, shaping reality, we see these stories of then normalizing this idea that, Japanese love KFC at Christmas. It's customary. It's a custom. Forgetting, of course, it's fake, right? It's a manufactured advertising piece, that is not true. It's purely a commercial campaign. Fascinating story there. KFC releases an Otaku Burger in Christmas for its Spanish market. Next bit of news, again, saw News 24, and I did not know this, but it turns out Hayao Miyazaki, who had announced his retirement from animation, is back. Studio Ghibli announces the release date for Hayao Miyazaki's new anime movie through the release of key art. Over on Twitter, we have a number of key art pieces that have been released, hyping the new Hayao Miyazaki anime film that'll be around the corner. Really interesting. So again, people suspected that the retirement of Miyazaki would be short-lived, and indeed that was the truth. We now have a new piece titled How Do You Live? Kimitachi wa dou ikuru ka? In Japanese, the feature-length theatrical anime shares its name with a 1937 novel by Japanese author Genzaburo Yoshino. However, while the article goes on to say that while Yoshino's book and its 2017 manga adaptation are a coming-of-age story set in pre-World War II Japan, Ghibli's How Do You Live anime is going to be a fantasy action-adventure anime. And in addition to being directed by Miyazaki, he's also credited for the anime movie's script and original creation. So it's going to be Miyazaki's first full-length anime project since The Wind Rises, way back in July of 2013. So interesting, yeah. So the release date is now penciled in for July 14th, 2023, so mid next year. Very soon, just around the corner. So it'll be interesting to keep an eye on that. To see the last three bits of news that we'll end on are all from the DCU universe. The first being rumors that Jason Momoa is going to be cast as DCU's Lobo. And this kind of mixed feeling of it. It's genius because it certainly fits with Jason Momoa's type of identity. But, you know, he's also Aquaman, right? So people saying it could backfire, the confusion around it. And again, this idea of backfiring might be right, because there's been a number of stories which have turned out not to be the case. The big one being, of course, that Henry Cavill has been dropped as Superman. Yeah, I mean, he announced a few weeks back that he was leaving The Witcher and taking up Superman, but now it's been announced that he is no longer Superman, that it's been definitively stated he won't be Superman. And this came through with a series of tweets, which surprised everyone, because again, Cavill had made his return already, appearing in the post-credit scenes in Black Adam as Superman, and there was a lot of hype about it, and it seemed certain now that Cavill was back as Superman in this new DCU universe. But yeah, Cavill posted on Twitter saying, I've just had a meeting with James Gunn and Peter Safran, and it's sad news, everyone. I will, after all, not be returning as Superman. Cavill then wrote on Instagram, after being told by the studio to announce my return back in October, prior to their hire, this news isn't the easiest. But that's life. The changing of the guard is something that happens. I respect that. So, behind the scenes, yeah, it seems that they're going for a younger Superman, and they're recasting, right? So they're handing on the mantle of Superman to a new actor who will be playing a young Superman in the new vision, the new kind of DCU universe that James Gunn and Peter Safran are setting up. So yeah, big surprise. And then following on from that, of course, are now a whole bunch of stories talking about the fact that Henry Cavill won't be able to return, or won't be returning, to The Witcher now, which was the franchise he left. For instance, The Guardian has this article titled, Henry Cavill won't return to The Witcher despite losing Superman role, because after that announcement, Netflix have come out confirming that the Australian actor Liam Hemsworth will continue as the casting choice for Geralt of Rivia in The Witcher. And yep, Cavill has been, even though Cavill's been dropped by DC Studios now, he's not coming back. So there we go. Yeah, what's happening next? I did see on Reddit someone saying he should be the new James Bond, but many people shooting holes in that, saying he's now too old, even though it turned out he was one of the finalists between him and Daniel Craig to do James Bond, but at that stage he was 20, which possibly would have been too young. Wow. Well, that's been Media Mothership for another week. Thanks very much for listening, diving into House on Haunted Hill via Chekhov's Gun. A little bit of news there. And next week will be our last show of 2022. And we'll go for a 1 week break after then, and we'll finish our discussion and analysis for House on Haunted Hill and set up the new analysis we'll be doing in the new year. So keep listening to Edge Radio 99.3. We've got some great stuff around the corner with Adrian's show, You Can't Sit Down, and it's been Media Mothership for another week. Thanks very much for listening, everyone. And yeah, I hope you have a safe and happy festive period coming up around the corner. Thank you.